Hey guys, welcome to my first official tutorial on how to set up a Minecraft server. A few people have requested it, so I'm going to go ahead and do it for you guys. We are going to be focusing on how to set up a Minecraft server along with plugins over time. As far as the tutorial is concerned, this is going to be mainly based at Windows users. I'm more familiar with Linux, but to be honest, doing it on Windows is easier. It's going to be set up locally on my PC at home, but if you're using a VPS or a dedicated Windows server, you'd need to connect to it via whatever remote access tools that you have to to perform the same functions. This video is going to basically cover Bukkit installation and configuration for the very first video. The second video, which is hopefully going to be out tomorrow, will have the essential configuration as well. As far as what plugins I do over the course of the series, I'm fairly flexible. If you guys have any requests that you want tutorials for, just put them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to accommodate them. But let's get started here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a folder for my server. I'm just going to call it, whoops, how have I spelled it right? Tutorial server, just for you guys. And it's just a folder just so I can keep all the files in. There's only two files that you're going to need to download for this video, and I've put them in the description below. And those two files are Bukkit. Now, bearing in mind with Bukkit, it updates frequently. Now, this video is going to be based on the current build, which, let me check actually, is 1818, which is the release, the recommended build for Minecraft 1.1. This website has all the builds on it. As you can see, the numbers are all showing down here. This is the one we're using, the one that was released on the 25th of January. That's the recommended build. That's the most stable current build right now without any bugs. That may change. It may change tomorrow. It may change later today. So running a Minecraft server, especially a popular one, is it's a lot of work, especially if you run one with a lot of plugins, because you constantly have to check if the plugins have updated. So there's a bunch of tools and repositories that you can use to do this. But anyway, so we're going to be using 1.18, which is the latest stable version, recommended stable version, I should say. But to start off, once you've decided where your server is going to be installed on your hard drive, I mean, you can just put it on your desktop. It really doesn't matter. You're going to copy the Bukkit jar that you've downloaded into that folder, and you're going to need to create a small batch file to start the server. And this is pretty simple to make. There's a few options available depending on where you've installed things, and I'll go over those. But essentially, all you need to put in these is exactly what I'm doing. And you need to put an @ symbol with echo off, normally in capitals, at the top. The next thing you need to do is point it to the location of your Java installation. Now, this is where it gets a little bit more confusing, because it depends on several factors. One, whether you're using 32 or 64-bit version of Java. Two, whether you've installed it to a different location. And three, what version you're using. For the purpose of this tutorial, I'm using version 7, which I think is the most recent one right now. So what I'm typing in here is basically the address, the location for my Java installation. Now, as you can see, the path for it has the Java version in, JRE7. So if you ever upgrade to, say, version 8, whenever that becomes available, you're going to also need to change this. I mean, that would probably just change to an 8, like that, something simple like that. But it's just worth keeping that in mind. Also, like I say, it depends where you've installed it. I've got the 64-bit version installed, which means that I can use program files, C:\program files. However, if you've got the 32-bit version, you'd need to change the program files folder, because there's a separate program files folder for 32-bit applications, which is this, program files brackets x86 close brackets. And you'd need to substitute that in there if you are using a 32-bit. Now, if you are running a 64-bit operating system, don't use 32-bit Java. Really, guys, update it. But if you are using a 32-bit version of Windows, then fine, you know, use the 32-bit version of Java. So once you've got the path in there, like I say, one other thing as well, if you've installed Java to anywhere other than the default path, this line is going to need to read where you've installed it. And I mean, I can't answer where you've installed it. That's for, you know, I have no way to find that out. You guys are going to need to kind of look into that. But that's the default location for Java 7 on a 64-bit Windows 7 system. So that should hopefully, you know, cover most of you guys. There's a couple of variables or switches that you can also use, and you may want to experiment on these, again, depending on how popular, how big your server is. This switch here turns on incremental garbage collection. Now, the benefit of doing that is every time Java runs garbage collection, you can experience a slight pause. And putting on incremental garbage collection eliminates that pause. However, it also decreases overall garbage collection performance by about 10%. So it may work for some, it may not work for others. So you may need to, you know, experiment with that a little bit. There's two or three more switches we're going to use. The main two really are your memory allocation. Now, I prefer to use two. Some people just prefer one. I just put the same switch in again. It's completely optional, and we're going to give this system 4 GB. But essentially, what this switch means is it defines the amount of memory Java can use for its maximum heap allocation. I'm going to give it 4 GB. You can have 1, 2, 3, 10, whatever you want. But that's the maximum amount of memory it can use. But what I also like to add is this one, and we'll set this to 1 GB. This is the initial size of the Java's heap allocation. So what it should do is when you first start the server up, it'll give itself this smaller amount of memory, and if it needs more, it can increase up to the maximum, which is 4 GB on this system. So if you do it this way, it doesn't automatically use 4 GB straight away. It essentially, it starts off small and then grows if it needs to. So it just frees up a little bit more memory until the system needs it. The last switch is just -jar. And the very last thing, well, there's two more things you need to put in here. You need to put in the name of your craft bucket file. Now, as you can see above, the file that we downloaded is craftbucket-1.1-r1.jar. The names change every time they release. So what I personally like to do is call them craftbucket.jar. I just rename it to something simple. That way, once this start batch file is set up, I don't need to worry about changing it. And the last thing that you need to do, in capital letters, is pause. And that stops the server command window from closing. Just makes it a little bit easier so you can see what's going on. And that is your startup file basically done. Now, they can be a lot more complicated. There's loads and loads of switches and variables you can use, but for the for most people that should be sufficient. If you want me to go over more Java collecting options and stuff, if you've got a bigger server, then I can do that at a later date. But what you need to do now is save this document. I'm just going to put it on the desktop, and you need to call it start.bat. BAT short for batch, but you need to click on this drop down and choose all files as well, and then you save it. And then on your desktop you've got this weird looking file here called start.bat, and if you edit it, you'll see is exactly what I've typed in there. And you need to copy that into your server folder. If you guys remember, we did rename our craft bucket in this file to craftbucket.jar, which doesn't match its current name, so we need to rename that as well. So it just needs to match whatever is in the start file. And that is essentially the basic steps of setting up a Minecraft server. It's really simple. You can do it in a few minutes once you've done it a few times. To start your server, all you do is double click on the start.bat file. Okay guys, as you can see, we've got an error, and I've purposely done a few things incorrectly here just to demonstrate why that's happened. The error message, as you can see, says C:\program is not recognized as an internal or external command. And the reason for that is because if you open up your start file, your batch file, program files has a space in it, and the batch file doesn't like that space. It doesn't recognize that space. So in order for it to bypass that space, you need to put this whole path in quotes, and that will read it as one whole path then, instead of looking for a directory called program, which doesn't exist. So don't forget that you need to put that in quotes. There are other ways of specifying Java. I mean, if your Java paths and variables are set up correctly, then theoretically you could replace all of that with just that, and you're welcome to try it. It works on my machine. It depends how your machine is set up. So you know, so you can try either, but if you're going to do the full path, you do need to put quotes in here. And when you close that, save it. When you run it, now you're going to notice a bunch of things happening here, as well as a black screen on this side. Essentially, what's going to happen is it's going to do its first launch, and it's going to start creating the worlds, you know, the maps, the permission files, etc., the operator files, the band player files. I'll show you all of those, and I'll go through each of those one by one. So when you double click start, you'll notice initially that this screen is completely black, but you can see that it's working because it's created all the folders here on the right. You've got a bunch of files here that have appeared, and if I were to open up my Minecraft, if you're connecting to your own server that's hosted on the same computer, you can just type in localhost. If it is a remote server or a hosted server, you're going to obviously need to type that IP address in. But as you can see, the server's up and running. You know, I can walk around, I can do whatever. So the server is working. However, there is still one small problem, and that this window, the console, is empty, which isn't very useful. The console is handy to diagnose problems. So to fix that, you need to close down the console, and you need to reopen your start.bat file, and all you simply need to do is delete the W off the end of Java, and that will give you output to a console. And when we run it this time, you'll see all the output here, and you can see the status of the console. I'll go through basically what this console means now. The startup script for this server is small. There are no plugins. It's very quick. It took 3 seconds to start up. If the more plugins you've got, the longer it's going to take. But essentially, you know, it tells you that it's starting the server, what port the server's running on. You can change the port, which I'll show you in a minute. Shows you what version of Bukkit you're using. Prepares the world if it hasn't already, and the spawn area. There's 3 levels. There only at the very beginning there was 1, then 2, then 3. 1 being the main world. Then there was a second when they added the Nether, and now there's a third with the end. It's saying that the permissions file is empty, of course, because we haven't done any permissions, and that it's done. And you can see when I join into the server, which will just take a second, you'll see that there's some text on the console as well, which basically says that I've joined. It gives the player's IP address and their port, and it tells you where, you know, the coords of their spawn, which is 180.65.217. And anything that I type in game is logged to the console as well. So the logs are very handy for diagnosing problems, or, you know, if you need to check something out. But let me go over each of the files as well. So you'll now have a lot more files, a lot more folders, and essentially from the top down, you've got the plugins folder, which is currently empty. Of course, as the series progresses, we'll be adding plugins to this folder. The world folder, which is the main world. You've got all the map files here, the region and data files, as well as the player files. Only one on at this one, obviously, because I'm the only person that's connected. The region files, again, these are map files. You don't want to mess with those. You don't want to mess with any of these, really. Occasionally, you may want to delete player.dat files, depending on if there's a problem. But for the most part, you shouldn't have to touch it. Same thing, really, for world the Nether. You've got the map and player data, and world the end. Really speaking, you shouldn't have to touch these 3 folders unless you're changing map, for the most part. Then you've got 2 text files, which are currently empty. you've got banned. Hang on, let me open that up. Edit. Banned players, which is empty, and banned IPs. Both of these are empty, but for example, for demonstration purposes, if I was to type in the console, by the way, if you're typing in the console, you do not have to put a slash in. You just type the command straight away. So, for example, ban phunkeymonkeh. Console, banning phunkeymonkeh, and if I go back to my game, yeah, I've been banned by an admin. And if I were to reopen this banned player files, my name is now in there because I've been banned. Obviously, we'll remove that. And the same for IP. If I was to ban an IP, the command is slightly different. It's ban IP, one word, space, then the IP address. And it adds it to the banned IPs.txt file. And you can edit these files manually, or you can do them via the console by using unban. Fairly straightforward, there's nothing too complicated. The one other file that you might want to change a little bit is bukkit.yml. This is Bukkit's configuration file. There's not many options in here. The only real thing that you need to consider is what worlds you want to allow. You don't need to touch aliases, you don't need to touch database, that's all pre-set up for you. It's just this bit here. Now, allow end is whether or not you want the end world to load. If you want to run a server without the end world, you just need to set that to false. Simple as that. You can also turn warn on overload messages. If your server gets busy and it can't quite keep up, the console will spit out messages saying that the server's overloaded. You can turn those messages on or off via that option. Spawn radius by default is a 16. Let me turn this Minecraft music down. Is a 16 block radius. You can increase or decrease that as you see fit. Only operators will be able to, by default, build within that region. Just so you know. Permissions file. We don't use Bukkit permissions. Personally, I don't use them. There are a lot of plugins out there that do a far better job, so just ignore that. And that's pretty much all you need to worry about here. You can put a ping limit on, but to be honest, the only thing I would worry about changing in here are these top three options: whether or not you want the end world allowed, whether or not you want the warn messages, and what spawn radius you want. And once you've made whatever changes you want, just save it. Simple as that. Craft bucket.jar, that's obviously our main Minecraft file. You don't change that. Ops text. This will do a very simple text file on your operators. So for example, if I wanted to make myself an op in the console, I just type in op phunkeymonkeh and it'll say opping. And if I were to reload this, oh, there you go. Do you want to reload it? Yes. It will now have my name in it. And it's just a very simple, simple list. One name per line. Pretty straightforward. Permissions.yml, again, ignore it. We don't use Bukkit permissions, and I'm not going to go over setting those up. They're outdated now. There's better alternatives. Server log. Now this is important. This logs everything that happens on the server from it starting up to well, until it's shut down, basically. And I'll go over quickly what this shows. It's very similar to the console. But it'll tell you information and warnings. Like you can see, there's warnings here, and what these warnings are basically saying is there was no ban list, no IP ban list, no operators, and no whitelist. That's fine. That's because the server was only just set up. It creates those by default when you first start it. This section here, when I first started the server, obviously there were no maps, so it was generating the maps at this point, and everything from this point on is just stuff we've done. Look, you can see us banning ourselves, opping ourselves. So the logs are very handy when you're trying to diagnose a problem, and it should be the first place you go to, really. This locked log file, that's normal. You don't need to touch it. It's because the server's currently running, the log file is locked, so don't worry about that. Server.properties, this is probably one of the next more important ones. This allows you to set how you want your server to run. And the options in here, very straightforward. you can allow or disable the nether, and again it's a case of setting it to true or false. You can change the name of your world, which by default is world. Personally, I never bother changing that, but you know, that's up to you. Allow flight, again up to you. If you set it to true, people will be able to fly, unless you've got you know, some other kind of no flying plugin installed, which again we'll cover later. If you set it to false, if somebody who tries flying will fly for a few seconds and then they'll get kicked, saying flying is not enabled on this server. So again, you can mess around with that. I mentioned that you can change the port. That is the default port. If you change it to anything else, which is it's no problem, but people who connect to your server will have to specify. So for example, right now, I'll just type it at the bottom here. Right now, to connect, I'm just connecting to that address. However, if I change the port, I'd have to change it to localhost : and then the port number, for example. So bear that in mind. You shouldn't really need to change it unless you're running multiple servers. Level type default, you don't really need to mess with that. You don't need to mess with enable Archon, which is remote control. Level seed, if you want a specific seed for your world, you can specify it there. You can put your server IP there, which for our purposes would be localhost, you know, depending on how you've got it set up. You can also spawn NPCs by default. You know, the NPC villages. You can set it on or off whether you want those testificate weird gonzo looking people there. You can turn the whitelist on and off, which you can also do from the console as well. You can set whether you want animals. Online mode is pretty important. If you set it to false, people with non-paid versions of Minecraft will be able to connect, and nicknames will not be verified. So people can take other people's names effectively. So I wouldn't recommend that really. You can turn on PvP. You can change the difficulty, 1 being the lowest, I believe. You can set the default game mode, 0 being survival, 1 being creative. So if you set that to 1, anybody who joins your server will automatically be in creative mode. You can set how many players you want. 20 is the default. You can put 10, 50, 100, depending how big your server is. Whether or not you want monsters on. The view distance. Now this is the distance that players, when players are looking, it's the distance that renders in front of them. 10 is the default. The higher the number, the more work for the server, basically. If you set that to 1, it'd be a lot less work for the server, but it would be very foggy for players. You know, stuff wouldn't render until they got really close to it. So, again, I'd probably leave that at 10. MOTD, message of the day. You can change that to anything you want. Doesn't matter. I'm going to change it to Hello Funky. And that's pretty much the main server properties file. Again, it's pretty straightforward stuff. The last file to go over is the whitelist. Again, it's just a plain text file. If it only comes into force when you have this whitelist set to true. And basically what happens then is if that is set to true, only people on this list will be able to connect. So if I turn the whitelist on by the console now, it's turned on whitelisting. I'm not in the list, so if I try to connect, it should tell me that I'm not whitelisted. Yeah. Oh, I got banned. I forgot about that. Let me unban myself. Oh, I might have to restart it. Sorry, guys. Let's restart the server real quick. Again, when there's no plugins on the server, it starts up super quick, 0.9 seconds. It really doesn't take long. Obviously, the more plugins, the longer it takes. Why is it still saying I'm banned? I shouldn't be banned. Oh, because I just banned myself again. Dope. Save. Right, now I should be unbanned. We'll get there eventually, guys. Okay, now that is interesting. Oh, the reason it let me on, sorry, I just forgot, is because operators, people who have operator, like I do, because I'm in the ops file, they overwrite a whitelist, which is why sometimes you'll see a server with 100 slots with 102 people on it. It's because the operators bypass any limits put in place. So that's why it's let me on. Like if I was to disconnect and de-op phunkeymonkeh, I shouldn't be able to connect now. Yes, you are not whitelisted on this server. And to get whitelisted, you can either edit the text file manually, but that requires a server restart to take effect. The easier way is to do it from the console, and you just type in whitelist space add phunkeymonkeh, and it says I've been added to a whitelist, and I should now be able to get on. There we go. So that is pretty much it, guys. That is the first video of the series. I was going to do Essentials as well, but this video took a little bit longer than I thought. I'll do Essentials immediately after and upload it later. That is essentially a basic Bukkit server. There's no extras on there right now. There's no permissions, no fancy chat plugins or anything else. That's your basic server setup. So what I'm going to go over in the next video is Essentials. Which has a lot of the cool things on it, like teleporting, setting spawn, setting warps, and loads of other stuff. So I'll go over that in the next video. Thank you for watching, and see you soon.